In Hollywood, the public once believed that the biggest stars didn't just shine on screen, but also stood as symbols of kindness and fairness. They wore the mantle of heroes, stood with the powerless, and nurtured faith in a world of equality and humanity. Yet when the stage lights dimmed, a very different face appeared. Some openly scorned black colleagues, some starlets harbored deep hatred toward people of Asian descent, and some leading men carried harsh prejudice against the Jewish community. Those secrets turned the legendary halo into a bitter paradox. And right now, we're about to expose 10 old guard Hollywood stars who were deeply racist. Topping this list with the biggest shock of all, Charlie Chaplin. 1. Charlie Chaplin, the champion of the little guy who also hurled racial slurs. Charlie Chaplin was hailed as the voice of the poor, the tramp who made the world weep for the downtrodden. But what stunned the public was that off-screen Chaplin used his power and fame to push down those weaker than him, from crew members to the very women who shared his life. Virginia Cherrill, his co-star in City Lights, said Chaplin repeatedly mocked black people right in front of the crew, treating it as entertainment. More than once, he forced black staffers to perform their native accents for laughs, then walked away with a smug air. Those actions laid bare a man accustomed to standing over others, turning them into props to reaffirm his status as the king of silent film. The irony ran deeper. Chaplin fawned over the powerful and wealthy. At parties in London and Hollywood, he was noted for shadowing figures like Winston Churchill or Lord Rothermere, the press baron with fascist sympathies. He would readily tell stories belittling the working class or people of color just to draw laughs from the elite. Many journalists of the time remarked bitterly that Chaplin built his career on performative compassion, while privately sustaining himself on flattery of power. His marriages further exposed a pattern of exploiting power to control those with less. With Mildred Harris, he wed her at 16 when he was 29, then abandoned her when she became pregnant. Lita Grey was also just 16 when she entered marriage with the 35-year-old Chaplin. It ended in a notorious divorce filled with allegations that he controlled, confined, and demeaned her for years. Later, his relationship with Paulette Goddard was calmer, but still unequal. She was kept as Chaplin's shadow, even with Una O'Neill, his last wife. Chaplin shocked the public by marrying her at 18 when he was 54. This sequence was not merely about age gap romances. It revealed a clear motif: Chaplin repeatedly chose girls far too young, easier to control and to impose upon. While audiences cried for the tramp crushed by society, few knew that in real life, Chaplin often recreated that very dynamic, only this time he was the oppressor. A celebrated humanitarian turned his private life into a stage of power where women and the vulnerable were mere set pieces. That truth warped the image of Chaplin, not only a cinematic genius, but also an emblem of the hypocrisy Hollywood enabled. And while Chaplin used laughter to mask his darkness, Walt Disney left behind another chilling chapter: allegations of fascist sympathies and anti-Semitism. 2. Walt Disney, the father of magic, entangled in alleged fascist ties and anti-Semitism. Mention Walt Disney and most people think of Mickey Mouse, Snow White, or parks ablaze with fireworks. He's the father of childhood, the man who brought magic to the world. But look closer at his real life, and the magic rests on an uneasy foundation: prejudice, exclusion, and relationships that make many shudder. Animator Art Babbitt, a close collaborator, bluntly said Disney attended meetings of the German-American Bund, a pro-Nazi organization in the U.S. That wasn't mere rumor. Other witnesses also claimed they saw Disney warmly shaking hands and chatting with people who openly admired Hitler. Crucially, throughout his career, he never clearly denied or corrected those accounts, letting suspicion cling to his name. The biggest shock came in 1938, just weeks after the Kristallnacht pogroms, when thousands of Jews were arrested and synagogues torched. Disney casually opened his Burbank studio to welcome Leni Riefenstahl, Hitler's famed propaganda filmmaker. European media blasted the move as trampling on human suffering. To many Jewish filmmakers, it all but confirmed that Disney prized power and profit over justice. The prejudice wasn't just in his circles, it seeped into the very works generations of children grew up with. In Dumbo 1941, the flock of crows with exaggerated voices and clownish behavior mirrored racist caricatures of black people: foolish, frivolous, unserious. Song of the South 1946 was worse, romanticizing the slave-era South as a dreamy land where black people sang cheerfully under white masters. This wasn't merely a sign of its time, as defenders claim it was a conscious choice to turn bias into entertainment, then sell it to audiences with tickets and souvenirs. Behind the scenes, colleagues recalled Disney often cracking barbs about Jews, especially New York artists. Mexican-born animator Bill Melendez said Disney openly disdained non-white coworkers. In California, Disney frequented elite clubs notorious for their unwritten "no blacks, no Jews policies. Rather than protest, he stayed treating it as a class privilege. The most troubling part, he packaged these prejudices as children's culture, shaping minds least equipped to resist. The sweet storybooks did more than tell fairy tales, they smuggled skewed templates of race and class. Some cultural scholars even argue Disney didn't just sell dreams. He sold a world where discrimination is neatly wrapped in magic. And yet, to this day, Disney's statue stands tall, the father of childhood joy. That dissonance leaves many dismayed. How could a symbol of happiness also be someone who tolerated and fostered bias? The magic he cast was not pure. Beneath it lay a darkness strong enough to dim childhood memories for many generations. If Walt Disney stunned the public with biases wrapped in pixie dust, the next name ignited even fiercer controversy. He didn't just embed prejudice in art, he publicly defended white supremacy before the world. That man was John Wayne. 3. John Wayne believed white supremacy was the only truth. Horses racing across the desert, a stern commander in war films, the straight-shooting man of justice. He was the Duke, and Time listed him among the 100 most influential cultural icons of the 20th century. But beneath the wide-brimmed hat and steely gaze, Wayne clung to an extreme conviction. He saw white supremacy not as an opinion, but as truth. In 1971, during a marathon interview with Playboy, Wayne declared plainly, "I believe in white supremacy until the blacks are educated to a point of responsibility." Printed verbatim in millions of copies and echoed on TV, the words shocked the nation. There was no muddle or misspeak. It was a manifesto delivered with confidence, as if he were playing another role scripted by prejudice. For years, Wayne's films painted Native Americans as savages, Mexicans as thieves, and black characters as nearly invisible. That wasn't accidental. In multiple backstage chats documented by journalists like Maurice Zolotow, Wayne showed clear contempt for these communities. He believed Hollywood didn't need too many unfamiliar faces, insisting audiences came to see white stories. That viewpoint became a template repeated across many of his classics. He went further, rationalizing history's bloodiest injustices. Asked about white settlers taking indigenous lands, he coolly replied, "It's just survival. The natives were selfish to keep all that land to themselves." Those words, bolded in Playboy, led historian Gary Wills to later call Wayne the man who rewrote American history in its most brutal terms. In the same interview, Wayne openly rejected the women's liberation movement and sneered at films with gay characters. He deemed them a sick lifestyle, asserting such characters didn't belong on Hollywood screens. For the LGBTQ+ community, the words of a superstar carried the weight of a public sentence, fueling bigotry that had lasted generations. Worse, Wayne didn't just talk, he acted. In 1960, when director Stanley Kramer considered inviting Paul Robeson, a celebrated black artist and civil rights activist, onto a project, Wayne allegedly lobbied behind the scenes to block it. As later interviews suggested, Wayne wanted to keep the left and radical blacks out of Hollywood. Robeson was sidelined, a single example of how Wayne was willing to use his clout to stall change. Even as the civil rights movement raged through the 1960s, Wayne's image dominated the big screen. He won an Oscar for True Grit 1969, was honored with statues, and lauded as America's hero. By the end of his life in 1979, he had never retracted his racist or homophobic remarks. Instead, he made frequent appearances at conservative political events, publicly opposing equality efforts. The bitter irony, while thousands of people of color bled for civil rights, his name was etched onto an international airport in Orange County. Wayne stands as proof of a paradox. Hollywood readily canonized a man who openly championed white supremacy, no matter what he said or did. But Wayne was only the beginning. The next figure, once praised as the most debonair gentleman on screen, revealed a truth that shook Hollywood: Clark Gable. 4. Clark Gable, the Gone with the Wind gentleman who was addicted to saying the N-word. For decades, Clark Gable embodied old Hollywood elegance: dark suits, sleek hair, and regal poise, the king of Hollywood. But behind the facade lay a harsher truth. Gable casually used the N-word in everyday speech. The N-word is among the most vicious slurs against black people in U.S. history, more than profanity. It's the emblem of an oppressive system tied to slavery and segregation. That a star of Gable's stature tossed it around so freely exposed not just his mindset, but Hollywood's willingness to look away. Hattie McDaniel, who made history as the first black Oscar winner for the Mammy role in Gone with the Wind, embodied Gable's contradiction. Publicly, he posed as her defender, objecting when she was barred from attending ceremonies at the Ambassador. He even praised her talent. Yet, in private conversations, McDaniel admitted that Gable repeatedly called her the N-word casually, indifferently, as if it were nothing. It didn't stop with McDaniel. Unpublished crew memoirs recount Gable ridiculing the black extras on set, mocking their voices, and Gate turning them into a running joke. During a 1939 shoot in Culver City, he reportedly dropped a vicious remark that silenced the room. Everyone understood no one had the power to confront Hollywood's brightest star. Los Angeles Times captured this paradox at official events. Gable was a man of fairness, denouncing segregated bathrooms on set. But at Beverly Hills parties, he spun jokes at black people's expense to roaring laughter. That was no private quirk, it was public entertainment built on demeaning a community. Why did Gable lean on the N-word? Film scholar Donald Bogle notes his Midwestern roots, where the slur often passed as common speech. But in Hollywood, where he could have changed, Gable chose to keep the habit, even turn it into a conversational style in private circles. The upshot, the refined gentleman worshipped by audiences, was a thin veneer. Beneath it was a two-faced man who used corrosive language to maintain racial distance. The shock cut deeper because one of Hollywood's brightest lights was steeped in such ugly words and behavior. And while Gable could still hide truth behind charm, another man, James Stewart, exposed himself right on set, where his brutal words made the entire crew recoil. 5. James Stewart refused to act alongside black performers in the Civil Rights era. Nothing is crueler than the silence of someone society hails as a role model. The line could have been written for James Stewart, once dubbed America's good man. On screen, he was the gentle soul of It's a Wonderful Life, the civic hero of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, the face of decency and fairness. Off-screen stories that surfaced later turned that image into a painful betrayal. While filming The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance 1962, black actor Woody Strode recalled the moment Stewart hurled slurs that stunned the set. John Ford, the famously tough director, had to step in immediately to stop a confrontation from exploding. Strode later told Ebony magazine he had never felt so degraded, and the sting of that day stayed with him for years. The shock didn't end there. In the early 1970s, when Stewart, now a TV legend, headlined his own sitcom, a young black actor was cast as a key advisor character. After just a few episodes, that character vanished as if he had never existed. Crew members revealed Stewart fiercely objected, insisting he wouldn't accept a black character lecturing his lead in front of millions. This wasn't mere personal taste. It was an overt move to erase a rare opportunity for a black actor, just as Hollywood was barely cracking its doors open. The New York Times also documented tensions around Stewart. He grew increasingly close to FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, known for hardline hostility toward both the civil rights movement and organizations fighting for equality. To Hoover, communist could mean anyone speaking up for black Americans. Stewart, America's hero, became a quiet but potent ally to that campaign. The deepest wound was the contradiction: a screen hero defending the weak, while off-screen he worked to push black colleagues aside. He didn't merely stand aloof from civil rights. He turned his prestige into a tool to block integration on his own stage. The beloved image of America's kindly father shattered. Stewart stands as proof of a harsh truth: even Hollywood's brightest faces can hide the darkest shadows. And when that mask falls, we learn that the hero on screen may have been just a role. Nor was Stewart alone. The next man on this list, another screen hero, Gary Cooper, revealed prejudices so cutting they turned his upright image into a colossal lie. 6. Gary Cooper, a screen hero obsessed with anti-Semitism. Gary Cooper was once called America's hero. With his tall frame, spare gaze, and plain-spoken style, he became an icon in films like High Noon and Mr. Deeds Goes to Town. Audiences saw in him a straight arrow, a kind of integrity that seemed unshakable. Yet behind that polished exterior lay a darker fixation. Cooper harbored a deep hostility toward the Jewish community, and he never bothered to hide it in private conversations. According to many colleagues at Beverly Hills parties, Cooper would lower his voice and spit out caustic remarks, insisting that Hollywood is being manipulated by Jews. He saw them as puppeteers behind major studio decisions and believed that unless things were cleaned up, the industry would lose its American character. Some Jewish screenwriters, such as Ben Hecht and Clifford Odets, later admitted in their memoirs that the atmosphere in 1940s-50s Hollywood was thick with suspicion. Words like Cooper's only intensified that fear, turning studio hallways into places of watchful glares and whispered takedowns. Why would a screen hero carry such an obsessive hatred of Jewish people? Perhaps because Cooper came from Montana, a place heavily shaped by conservative thought. When he entered Hollywood, he brought those hometown prejudices with him, and instead of changing, he reinforced them with the power that fame bestowed. In Cooper's eyes, the rise of Jewish filmmakers threatened the natural order he believed America must uphold. That warped conviction turned him into a spreader of bias, sowing fear under the banner of defending American values. It didn't stop at words. Cooper directly abetted the crackdown. When the HUAC Committee began its anti-communist hearings in Hollywood, he became one of the willing star witnesses. The appearance of Cooper, an all-American hero, was covered by U.S. media as proof that Hollywood truly needed cleansing. Though he didn't name names, his presence effectively legitimized the machinery of repression, pushing hundreds of writers, actors, and directors, many Jewish or supportive of civil rights causes, onto blacklists, costing them jobs, even forcing some to leave the country to survive. The irony is that while he demeaned a community for being different, Cooper's private life exposed a story that American society of the time considered taboo. Sources ranging from tabloids like Confidential to Friends' memoirs mentioned a relationship with actor Randolph Scott. The two were reportedly spotted sharing a rental villa in Malibu, and photos intimate enough to alarm Paramount allegedly had to be buried fast. A man who knew what it meant to live in fear because his private life diverged from norms should have sympathized with those facing prejudice. Instead, Cooper chose the hard right side, turning his own insecurity into a weapon attacking the Jewish community and stalling any move toward inclusion in the industry. That contradiction made Gary Cooper's image one of classic Hollywood's great tragedies. On screen, he saved a town with courage. Off-screen, he spread fear among hundreds simply because their roots and beliefs differed. Critic Richard Schickel once observed, Cooper didn't just play integrity, he used the role to mask some of the cruelest prejudices. Cinematic glory can't cover that darkness. Cooper stands as clear proof of how Hollywood both erects statues and enables those who wield power to oppress and exclude. Right after him came another star who entered the pantheon of icons, yet carried an equally bitter attitude. That was Vivien Leigh, who in real life looked down on black people to the marrow. 7. Vivien Leigh Scarlett O'Hara in life, contemptuous of black people. On December 15, 1939, Gone with the Wind premiered in grand fashion in Atlanta, Georgia. The nation broadcast the event. Thousands lined up to see the cast in person. On screen, Vivien Leigh as Scarlett O'Hara dazzled the world with haughty beauty and imperious eyes. But behind the applause, a shocking truth emerged. In real life, Leigh harbored deep contempt for black people. And it wasn't just in the script. During filming in Atlanta, multiple backstage witnesses recalled that Leigh frequently made disparaging comments about black actors. She saw them as the background of the story, suited only to servant costumes and the far edge of the frame. According to a crew member's memoir, Leigh once refused to enter the makeup room after seeing black extras inside, demanding that her assistant clear the space before she would appear. It wasn't mere diva behavior, it was a stark sign of entrenched racial prejudice. As the film drew heavy criticism after World War II, Gone with the Wind condemned as a lavish varnish over slavery. Hattie McDaniel, the first black Oscar winner for the Mammy role, became a flashpoint, her performance attacked as a servant stereotype. Prominent journalists like Richard Schickel of Life and Bosley Crowther of the New York Times urged the lead cast to speak up amid the rising civil rights movement. Clark Gable at least protested segregated restrooms on set. But Vivien Leigh chose absolute silence. No explanation, no apology, only cold indifference, as if the outcry had nothing to do with her. That silence condemned her further. A startling anecdote recorded in a British reporter's diary claims that at a private London screening in 1940, Leigh laughed at a scene where a black maid kneels to pick up Scarlett's dress hem, then turned and remarked with a sneer that they only look natural in that position. Even whispered those words shadowed her with an indelible stain. Her legendary beauty and emerald eyes made audiences so enamored they were willing to forgive anything. But that glow hid an unpleasant truth. Vivien Leigh didn't just play Scarlett O'Hara, she lived like Scarlett, carrying the Old South's prejudices, a South built on black pain and submission. That legacy carved a deep crack in classic Hollywood's portrait. Leigh proved that even screen goddesses could help uphold injustice. And while Leigh kept silent, Katharine Hepburn chose open hostility, turning rejection into public invective as the world sank into war. 8. Katharine Hepburn, a feminist icon who carried a bitter hatred of the Japanese. Katharine Hepburn is often celebrated as an early face of female empowerment in Hollywood. She wore trousers when America still gasped at the sight she played women who dared to love live and push against convention. Yet behind that halo of feminist icon, another darkness appeared, a marrow-deep hatred of Japanese people etched into her psyche after Pearl Harbor in 1941. That morning's news, Japan's attack on the U.S. naval base in Hawaii, shook the globe. Over 2,400 service members and civilians killed, ships sunk by the dozen. Americans were furious, and Hepburn was no exception. But instead of sharing the nation's grief, she turned it into a public oath. In a conversation with a reporter at the Beverly Hills Hotel, Hepburn was quoted declaring, "I cannot and will never work with anyone of Japanese blood." The line ran in multiple papers, making her a prominent voice in the surging anti-Japanese tide. The hatred showed in actions, not just words. According to Los Angeles Herald-Examiner files, Hepburn rejected a Broadway contract because several supporting actors were Japanese-American California-born with no ties to the military. She saw them as hidden dangers, spies in artists' clothing. That attitude spread to film sets. Japanese characters in scripts were often pushed into spies, villains, or mute shadows. One embittered writer noted, "The pressure from Hepburn buried an entire community of artists beneath humiliating roles." The painful contradiction: the world hailed Hepburn as a symbol of freedom and gender equality, even as she helped build a wall of harsh discrimination. She could wear pants and defy gender norms, but slammed shut doors on Japanese performers out of personal hatred. Life magazine once wrote, "Hepburn's freedom has borders. It ends the moment she sees a Japanese name on the call sheet." Years later, as the civil rights movement surged, many stars tried to reconcile and speak for healing. Hepburn stayed silent. That silence confirmed that anti-Japanese sentiment wasn't a wartime lapse, but a scar that ran through her career. Behind the glow of the independent goddess was an actress who let resentment turn her into a tool of prejudice. And just as the public was reckoning with that contradiction, Hollywood faced another equally conflicted figure: Marlon Brando, a man who openly challenged injustice at the Oscars, yet spread corrosive biases in his private life. 9. Marlon Brando, a two-faced genius, public civil rights champion, private bigot. Marlon Brando's refusal of the Oscar in 1973 is remembered as an earthquake in Hollywood. Instead of accepting for The Godfather, he sent Sachin Littlefeather to speak against the industry's portrayal of Native Americans. Live television carried the moment to millions of American homes, and Brando was instantly hailed as a warrior for justice, an artist defying the system. But behind the spotlight, private accounts of his behavior made many recoil. Rita Moreno, Brando's longtime lover, said that at private parties in his Mulholland Drive mansion, he often mocked black speech and mannerisms to amuse friends. According to Moreno, a drunken Brando once blurted, "I can't put my trust in a black person inside my own home." Those weren't one-off jokes. They recurred habits baked into how he saw the world. Worse close friends later confirmed Brando also tossed vicious remarks about Asians and Latinos around the dinner table. A New York Post journalist wrote in private notes that Brando had two faces, publicly backing equality, while within his circle he scattered prejudice as casually as seasoning a story. The contradiction sharpened alongside his public activism. Brando marched with Martin Luther King Jr., appearing in Washington, D.C. for the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. He became a symbol of artists standing with civil rights. Yet at the same time, several black colleagues said Brando kept them at arm's length off set and even avoided sustained collaboration with them on film projects. Western media began to question him. The Guardian called him a monument of contradictions, a man who made history while adding a stain. The public split. Some still praised his courage. Others argued Brando used justice as a self-polishing mirror, weaponizing social movements to craft the image of the great rebel. Brando's legacy is therefore a jumble. A peerless actor, yes, but a name that also evokes a two-sided genius who shook Hollywood while spreading bitter prejudices in private. While Brando turned justice into a mask, another voice, Bing Crosby, used his soothing tone to veil bigoted jokes inside his own home. 10. Bing Crosby, the Christmas voice who planted prejudice at home. Bing Crosby's voice once filled radio airwaves every holiday season. His White Christmas became the century's best-selling song, America's soundtrack of family warmth. Yet inside his Holmby Hills home, ringed by rose gardens and white fences, the air grew heavy. Crosby turned his prejudice into dinner-table entertainment. Gary Crosby, the eldest son, wrote in his memoir that family dinners often opened with a routine that chilled the children. The man millions hailed as Santa Claus in the flesh would mimic black speech as a comedy bit, then switch to clipped Latino accents. For extra flavor, he'd add smears about Jews and end with, "It's just a joke." To Crosby, racism wasn't taboo. It was a pastime repeated like a sick refrain. The world outside showed the same pattern. In California, Crosby belonged for years to golf clubs and elite dining rooms with quiet but understood no blacks, no Jews policies. Many Hollywood peers chose to protest. Crosby stayed, raising a glass, treating exclusion as a class privilege. A Los Angeles Times feature in the late 1950s even recalled an incident where he refused a charity performance because the organizers had too many immigrants. The most shocking part was how Crosby poured his prejudice into his own family. He knew that openly demeaning black or Jewish people could spark scandal, so he turned that power inward into a tool of discipline. Gary Crosby described beatings without cause and tirades that drew blood his father's need to prove dominance at any cost. That need to stand above others turned a beloved singer into the tormentor of his own household. Gary wrote bitterly, "I grew up convinced that if you were a different color or background, my father would look down on you and crush you. The public saw a gentle priest in going my way, a tender father whenever he spoke on the air." But inside Crosby's walls, it was the opposite. Children flinched at mean-spirited jokes and sudden rages. The voice of Christmas thus became a brutal paradox, a warm sound outside an endless winter of prejudice within. That two-facedness is hard to accept. Crosby didn't just wound his family, he planted prejudice in the next generation, turning racism into a grotesque tradition wrapped in seemingly sweet melodies. 11. Johnny Carson. The Tonight Show was nearly closed off to black artists. The last name on the list is Johnny Carson. Under Johnny Carson. The Tonight Show was once seen as a golden springboard, where anyone who made it into the guest chair could change their life. But looking back at the guest list over the 3 decades he helmed the show, a cold reality emerges. The number of black artists Carson invited on air was so small you could count them on one hand. Sammy Davis Jr., the Rat Pack star, was one of the few who appeared regularly. But observers at the time noted that Davis Jr. felt like a good-luck charm Carson used to prove to viewers he wasn't prejudiced. The on-air hugs and kisses between them were staged as historic moments, while behind the scenes Davis Jr. was called by many in the industry a black fig leaf for a program that was otherwise nearly lily-white. Richard Pryor, the most outstanding black comedian of the 1970s, was also invited by Carson, but only on rare occasions. Instead of letting Pryor run free with the hard-edged material on race that made his name, the Tonight Show team trimmed and restricted his content, turning him into a bland version of himself to placate white audiences. Eddie Murphy also appeared in the late 80s, but as many outlets like the Los Angeles Times noted, that was when Carson needed to refresh his image after criticism that his show failed to reflect a changing society. Beyond those 3, the roster of black artists who sat across from Carson was almost empty. Black jazz and R&B singers like Nina Simone, Marvin Gaye, and Aretha Franklin repeatedly expressed their desire to be invited, but The Tonight Show's door stayed shut. An internal NBC document cited by Variety shows that Carson struck Nina Simone's name from the 1965 guest list with only a short note too political. This laid bare Carson's approach to keeping television both squeaky clean and blindingly white, refusing anything that hinted at racial injustice. On the rare occasions when black guests did appear, it was essentially a tactic for Carson to shore up public goodwill. A television critic at the New York Times once wrote, "Every time Carson shook hands with a black artist on air, viewers breathed a sigh of relief, as if America had become fair. But the truth is, he let them in as strangers, and then slammed the door behind them." The most painful part is that Carson's guest chair could determine a career's fate. A great many white artists, from Steve Martin to Joan Rivers, stepped off the Tonight Show stage and became legends. Meanwhile, an entire generation of black talent was left on the sidelines because Carson wanted to preserve a safe space for a conservative white audience. In hindsight, a chilling paradox emerges. The man hailed as America's best friend also became the gate that blocked diversity. Johnny Carson wasn't just the king of late night. He was the figure who held the power to lift an artist to the summit or cast them into permanent shadow, and he used that power to maintain a ruthlessly segregated Hollywood. A single guest chair could change a life, yet in Johnny Carson's hands, it became a door closed to people of color. And once the late-night king made that truth plain, the public was even more shocked when they turned to John Wayne, a man who didn't just discriminate in silence, but brazenly praised white supremacy as if it were America's creed. Looking back at these stories, we see that Hollywood is not all light and magic. There are dark corners that are hard to accept. Stars once hailed as legends have in the end left stains that can never be erased. What about you? Which star on this list shocked you the most? And are there other names you want me to keep exposing in future videos? Leave a comment below so we can talk it over. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video so you won't miss any earth-shattering secrets from Hollywood's backstage. See you in the next episodes.